Welcome to the debate. You know, when structural engineers design a skyscraper, everyone marvels at the glass facade or the smart elevators.
Right, the energy-efficient climate systems, all the flashy stuff.
Exactly. But the most permanent, unforgiving part of that building is entirely invisible once it's finished. I mean, it's the concrete foundation buried deep underground.
Oh, absolutely. And once that concrete cures, it's done. You cannot retrofit a deeper foundation 10 years later when you suddenly decide, the building needs to support 30 more floors,
Right, you either built it to scale from day one or you're tearing up the ground.
which is a nightmare.
It is. It's a permanent constraint. And today, we are looking at a multi-million-dollar mistake companies are making because they are pouring the digital equivalent of bad concrete. We're talking about the architectural decisions that will constrain or enable an organization's compliance capability and AI readiness for the next decade. Specifically, we're diving into the source material analyzing the SAP FICO blueprint.
Right, the financial accounting and controlling modules?
Yeah, which is essentially the central nervous system and the core general ledger for global enterprises.
We are looking at how to redesign this blueprint for a real-time compliance world.
And that is crucial because the environment has shifted completely. And frankly, a lot of companies are panicking.
Oh, big time.
In the old days, you would send an invoice out and maybe, 3 years later, you get audited by a tax authority. But today, we are in an era of continuous transaction controls, or CTCs.
Right, the real-time stuff, exactly. Tax authorities are now watching transactions in real time. They demand instantly machine-readable data sent directly to their digital portals before you even send the invoice to your customer.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And if they don't digitally clear it, your invoice is legally invalid. You literally can't even ship the goods.
Which brings us to the core tension we are unpacking today. In this era of real-time, zero-latency regulatory scrutiny, where should the burden of compliance live?
Right, that's the million-dollar question.
I represent the minimalist or externalized approach. I look at this and I think the only way to survive is to drastically minimize SAP's compliance role. You keep the SAP core perfectly clean of tax logic and push the burden of compliance to an external orchestration layer.
And I take the internal governance position because I look at this exact same environment and think your approach is a recipe for disaster.
Really? A disaster.
A complete disaster. Because the blueprint is no longer just about financial accounting, It is fundamentally a compliance infrastructure design. If you don't embed rigorous compliance governance into SAP's internal document structures, master data workflows, and organizational entity designs, your downstream systems are just going to fail.
Well, let's unpack that because I want to explain why keeping the core clean isn't just like an IT preference. It's a survival strategy.
Okay, go ahead.
The most catastrophic SAP blueprint errors I see come from a legacy mindset where we try to embed detailed, volatile tax logic directly into the SAP core. I'm talking about hard-coding VAT rates, country-specific tax codes, and what we call condition records.
Condition records are essentially the underlying rule sets in SAP. They tell the system, if selling product X in country Y to customer Z, apply this specific tax rate.
Exactly. And 20 years ago, building those rules into your ERP totally made sense. But in a real-time compliance world, regulatory mandates change constantly.
They do. It's nonstop.
Right. Italy updates a format, France introduces a new e-invoicing mandate, Brazil changes a tax rate. If you tightly couple your tax determination to today's regulatory environment inside SAP, you are creating massive compounding technical debt.
I completely agree that hard-coding volatile tax rates into the ERP is a bad idea.
Right. Because every upgrade, every new mandate becomes a massive custom development project. You have to tear open the core of the system.
Sure, but I think we need to draw a very sharp line between tax logic and compliance data governance.
But aren't they functionally intertwined if you're asking SAP to handle them both? Think of SAP as the main water supply for a massive city. It provides the raw, clean volume you need.
Okay, I'm following.
But every household, or in this case, every tax jurisdiction needs a very specific, different type of filter on their tap. The legacy approach is trying to build a million different custom filters down into the reservoir itself.
Right.
The modern approach is keeping the reservoir perfectly clean. SAP should only serve as a first-pass classification based on broad categories like business type or material type. It pumps out standard, complete transaction data through well-defined APIs.
Okay.
Then you let a smart, external, data orchestration and compliance layer attach the right filter right at the endpoint to navigate the specific, volatile jurisdiction logic.
I mean, I like the water reservoir analogy, but let's take it a step further. You're assuming the water entry in the reservoir is just pure water.
Well, yeah.
But what if it's missing a core chemical property right at the source? The clean data source model is an absolute illusion if the foundational SAP document and organizational structures are underdesigned.
Wait, give me an example. What kind of foundational data are we talking about that SAP can't just pass along?
I'm talking about master data. Master data quality is the foundation everything else depends on. You say the external API platform handles the compliance, but what happens if a business partner is entered into SAP without a validated VAT registration number?
You mean like an incomplete profile? Exactly. Let's say the sales team just wants to close the deal, so they skip putting in the exact officially formatted tax ID. In the old days, whatever. Finance fixed it later.
Right. They just patch it up at month end.
Exactly. But today, under a real-time CTC mandate, if the SAP document structure lacks that mandated CTC field at the point of creation, the external platform fails immediately.
But wouldn't the external platform just flag the error during its validation process? Like it checks the data against the current regulatory specs and says, hey, this is missing a VAT number.
Exactly. It flags it after the fact. The transaction is already broken.
Oh, I see. A business partner entered without a validated VAT number generates non-compliant invoices from the very moment it is used in the system. These are not minor data entry errors that a smart API can just recalculate around, you know? They are structural data governance failures.
So you're saying the error happens too far downstream?
Yes, they require governance processes embedded right into the SAP workflow. The VAT registration numbers must be validated against official government registries at the exact point of creation.
Inside SAP?
Inside SAP. If your blueprint doesn't specify the workflow that literally prevents a business partner from being saved or used in transactions until those compliance-critical fields are validated, your master data quality degrades from day one. You cannot retrofit that downstream. Your external layer has no foundation to stand on. It's just a highly efficient pipe pumping toxic water to the government.
Okay. You've convinced me that basic master data like a VAT number or a specific delivery address fundamentally needs to be captured cleanly at the source.
Thank you.
The system shouldn't let you proceed without it. But there is a profound difference between capturing clean foundational data and turning SAP into the engine that determines the exact legal submission format.
Well,
If we just specify the API outputs and define the data standards in the blueprint, new mandates just become a configuration exercise in the external layer. SAP itself doesn't change.
but the line between clean foundational data and compliance logic is much blurrier than you are acknowledging. And this brings us from the data level to the structural level. I mean, how the business itself is architected inside SAP.
Okay, where are we going with this?
Let's look at the global compliance challenge regarding company codes and legal entities.
Because SAP isn't just a list of transactions, it's a digital reflection of the corporate structure.
Right. And in a global enterprise, architects usually design organizational structures, the company codes, the controlling areas, the cost center hierarchies, purely for internal management reporting.
Sure. They ask the executives, hey, how do our business units need to see this data to track performance? But in doing so, they completely ignore the legal entity and tax registration requirements.
Well, let me stop you there because the system exists to run the business.
I mean, yes, but management relies on profit centers and controlling areas being structured in a way that reflects their operational reality, not their legal liability. If I'm an executive, I don't care about the Italian tax authority's preference when I'm trying to measure my European sales team's performance.
I hear you.
Doesn't forcing arcane legal compliance structures onto operational reporting create immense friction for the people actually trying to steer the ship?
It's a completely fair question, and honestly, it's exactly what executives argue during the blueprinting phase.
Right, because they need to steer the company.
But let me show you how prioritizing internal management over legal reality actually plays out on the ground. Imagine that European executive team. They want to see a single European sales bucket in SAP to track their performance and calculate their bonuses. It makes sense operationally.
Right. Clean, simple, unified.
But the Italian tax authority doesn't care about your internal European sales bucket. When you ship goods out of Milan, the government wants an invoice tied to a specific Italian legal entity with a registered local fiscal address and authorized signatory information.
Right, the local compliance piece.
Exactly. So if your SAP system isn't built to output that specific Italian legal identity natively, if it just says European sales, the compliance API rejects the invoice.
So what happens? The truck is sitting at the dock?
Exactly. The truck does not leave the warehouse. So what does a human have to do? They have to undergo a manual reconciliation process.
Oh, wow.
A human literally has to download the data into a spreadsheet, manually map the European sales data to the correct Italian legal entity, doctor the data to include the fiscal addresses, and then upload it to the government portal.
Just to get the truck moving.
Just to get the truck moving. The design principle for a compliance-aligned organizational structure must be entity clarity.
Entity clarity.
Yes, every legal entity that has a tax registration obligation in any jurisdiction must be cleanly and distinctly represented in the SAP org structure. Without entity clarity, you are building in a permanent constraint.
I see.
The manual reconciliation required to bridge the gap between management reporting and tax reporting doesn't just create friction, it creates massive compliance risk.
I see the pain point there. I really do. But let's look at the compounding consequences over a decade.
Okay.
If you build all of those highly specific, granular legal entity requirements directly into your core document and organizational structures, what happens in year 4? Year 5, mandates shift, legal entities merge, tax laws rewrite the definition of a fiscal presence.
And you have to update the system.
But updating a heavily customized SAP core is notoriously brutal. We have to look at what architects call the regulatory horizon assessment.
Right.
A competent architecture team evaluates which mandates will become effective during the system's first 3 years of operation. The externalized model anticipates that the future beyond that is entirely unknown.
Sure, you can't predict everything.
Exactly. By building robust APIs and keeping the core lean, the system is fundamentally more agile. Every year the system operates, a cleanly externalized blueprint pays out in avoided maintenance, avoided compliance remediation, and avoided upgrade risk.
Well, I agree completely that blueprint decisions compound, but I would argue they usually compound negatively, precisely because the most critical design session is the one nobody is having.
Wait, what do you mean?
You talk about the blueprint phase, anticipating the future through APIs, but let's look at the human element. Let's look at who is actually in the room making these decisions.
You mean the consultants versus the business owners?
I mean the specific types of experts. Picture the actual blueprinting workshop. The sessions focused on organizational structure and financial ledgers are well attended. You have brilliant FICO consultants leading the charge.
Naturally.
But the workshops regarding tax determination, document structure, and the interface with external compliance platforms are consistently skipped or just given lip service.
Really?
Yes. Why? Because FICO consultants generally lack indirect tax expertise.
Which is understandable. They are financial accounting and controlling experts, basically the nervous system architects of the business. They are not regulatory tax lawyers.
Exactly. So they turn to the internal accounting team and ask, hey, what do you need to see in this document to close your books?
Makes sense.
Right. And they are literally designing the next 10 years of the company's data structure based on that answer. But nobody in that room is asking the vital question, what does the French government's digital portal need to see?
Ah, right.
The CTC field coverage review is totally absent. The blueprint misses the need for validated supplier VAT numbers, or document reference numbers at the line item level.
So they just build a system that works perfectly for the year 2010.
Precisely. And fixing those compliance gaps downstream takes months and costs millions of dollars. The failure isn't that SAP can't handle it. The failure is that the human beings designing the blueprint didn't specify the governance, didn't require the fields, and didn't enforce the validation at the point of entry.
It is a massive oversight to leave indirect tax specialists out of those initial workshops. I'll grant you that entirely.
It's the root of the problem.
But even if they are in the room, I would argue the outcome of that workshop shouldn't be to bloat SAP with rules. The outcome should be strictly specifying what data SAP provides to the external layer.
I wouldn't call it bloating, though.
Well, the API specification must be reviewed by the compliance platform team and accepted before either system is configured. That is how you solve the missing design session, by strictly defining the boundary between where SAP ends and where the compliance platform begins.
But you can't just...
If we define the API strictly, SAP remains the most reliable source of clean financial data. The moment you ask it to also be a compliance system, you have asked it to be two things, and it will do both less well than a system designed for each purpose separately.
But the boundary isn't a clean line. It's an interlocking mechanism. The compliance platform cannot function if the SAP document structure isn't acting as a machine-readable regulatory submission template from the exact moment of posting.
I mean, I see how they connect.
Right? If you want SAP to be a reliable source of clean financial data, that data must be structurally compliant at birth. It's not about bloating the system with rules. It's about giving the data the correct anatomy so the external tools can actually read it.
Well, let's summarize where we stand on this, because it's a fascinating divide on how to approach enterprise architecture.
It really is.
My position is that to survive multiplying real-time regulatory mandates, SAP must be fundamentally decentralized from compliance logic. Tightly coupling tax determination to the SAP core builds technical debt that stifles innovation.
And I still disagree.
Right. But from my view, SAP should serve purely as the clean, highly governed source of financial truth, empowering a dedicated external API orchestration layer to navigate the volatile, ever-changing roads of real-time compliance.
And my position is that your external layer is entirely dependent on the structural reality of the ERP. A system is only as good as its blueprint.
Sure.
Without embedding strict CTC field requirements, entity clarity in the organizational structure, and master data validation directly into SAP's core workflows, those external systems have no foundation to stand on. Compliance isn't something you can bolt on after the fact. It must be engineered into the document creation process itself.
I think where we strongly converge on the permanence and the sheer criticality of the blueprint phase itself. The blueprint is the most permanent step of an SAP implementation.
Completely agree.
And we also agree that the historical approach to blueprinting is fundamentally flawed when it comes to personnel.
Absolutely. Indirect tax specialists and compliance architects must be integrated into those early FICO blueprint workshops. It is non-negotiable today.
Right.
That collaboration cost a few extra days of design work up front, but it prevents massive, multi-million-dollar remediation projects down the line.
It really highlights the stakes of designing for a real-time compliance world, and we haven't even touched deeply on the AI aspect, but it's the natural conclusion of this.
Oh, for sure.
The decisions made today, whether to externalize logic or internalize governance, will completely dictate an organization's AI readiness.
Without a doubt, because AI learns from patterns. If your pattern involves human intervention to fix text data in Excel every Tuesday, your AI either learns a flawed process or just errors out.
To eventually optimize your global supply chain, it needs flawless, structured data.
Exactly.
But if your team is constantly exporting data from SAP, manually fixing missing tax IDs, and bridging the gap between management reporting and legal entity reporting, your AI is looking at a fragmented, broken reality. It's dead on arrival.
It forces you to look at your ERP not just as a piece of software you install, but as a long-term infrastructure project.
Precisely. Because just like that skyscraper we talked about at the beginning, once the concrete of your FICO blueprint cures, you have to live with the foundation you poured.
For better or worse.
Right. The question for any organization navigating this space is, did you pour a foundation built to support the intelligence and compliance demands of the future, or one that will eventually crack under the weight of it?
It's a heavy question.
It is. For those diving into this, we highly recommend looking closer at your own system's original blueprint decisions. There is a lot to uncover. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Debate.